WNST. Towson, real fresh, real fast in the Rofo Arena, hosting all things Baltimore Brigade beginning May 25th. The Philadelphia Soul of Phil Jaworski bring the AFL team down to the Royal Farms Arena. Here's a guy who knows a little bit about arena football and real football and fake football and college football and pro football. We welcome back one of my favorite people. He's the former Ravens scouting director for the Super Bowl 35 champions. He's been running around collecting rings down there in Alabama as the longtime color man aside Eli Gold for all things Crimson Tide football and the one-time leader of the Cleveland Browns, but we don't hold that against him. He is the director of all things Senior Bowl and the Reese's Senior Bowl in Mobile, Alabama. Phil Savage joins us, who's one of the busiest men in scouting, and it's been hard. Despite our friendship, Phil, I've had a hard time tracking you down. I follow you on Twitter. I follow you at philsavage.com or philsavagefootball.com, and I saw your Ozzie Newsome stuff, but the longer we wait between conversations, the more delicious it gets. I mean, we've got a full-fledged quarterback controversy here that was brought on by Ozzie. Phil, explain to me what's happening in Baltimore, my friend.
Well, I hope you're doing well, Nestor, and I'm sorry we didn't catch up before the draft. You cannot imagine what that rat race was like ahead of the draft, and I actually did 25 hours of radio myself from Tuesday through Saturday of the draft over on Sirius XM. So it was a breathless pace there.
It's a good thing I gave you all those radio skills all those years ago, Phil. I taught you how to do radio. Now that you do this for a living.
You absolutely taught me. That was a great experience back in the day. But, yeah, the Ravens, I thought, first of all, in the opening round, it was a legacy pick with Ozzie Newsome, the former tight end, Hall of Fame player, picking Hayden Hurst, the South Carolina tight end. And then, there was a lot of speculation that a team would dive back into the bottom of the first round and take one of these quarterbacks, and the Ravens were the team that did that. They go in at 32, and they take Lamar Jackson. And, I know our initial reaction with the guys that I was with, Pat Kerwin and Jim Miller and Gil Brandt, was that, okay, this is quite a contrast between styles of the style of play of Joe Flacco, the style of play that will have to be utilized with Lamar Jackson. And, the sense is that Joe Flacco probably has 1 year left in Baltimore. They'll be working with Lamar Jackson on the side, trying to develop packages for him to play some this year, and then full-fledged be the starter in 2019. And I think that's the prevailing thought out there.
Phil, your real assessment on Lamar Jackson's obvious. I mean, you've talked about him, the fifth quarterback taken. Why did he drop? What's the word on him? What's the inside skinny on why the most? I would have taken him over Baker Mayfield. I don't like the makeup of Baker Mayfield. I wouldn't have taken him. The Browns have taken him again. You've had your own legacy with that. I'm not anti Lamar Jackson, but I am a little bit perplexed by folding up shop on Flacco, that maybe they know something about his back that we don't, maybe the knee that led to the back, that 33 and where they are, and that they don't see the future with him, and maybe Steve sees it that way. But I found this to be something really, really unorthodox, even by Ozzie standards, to do this and to bring on a quarterback that's such a different style and a running. I was blown away that he rushed for more yards than Saquon Barkley, Phil. Because that can't happen in the NFL. That's a stat that doesn't matter in the NFL for me, because I can't have my quarterback running like that.
Yeah, I think that a couple of general overview comments. On one hand, in my mind, if Vince Young went number 3 overall, then it is perplexing why Lamar Jackson would go 32 overall in the first round. Honestly, I was more impressed with Jackson when I went to his practice 2 falls ago and saw him in person than I was with Vince Young. When he came out. He's not quite as big, I suppose. I would certainly say he was definitely as high profile, although Young and Texas won the national championship. I mean, Lamar Jackson won the Heisman Trophy and actually exceeded some of the numbers that he posted as a sophomore this past year. I think there's 3 things that I've sort of boiled these quarterbacks down to in evaluating them, Nestor. Maybe you'll find this interesting. So, number 1 is accuracy. Can they truly have pinpoint accuracy with the football, throwing it to the front shoulder, throwing it away from the defender, throwing the football to lead the receiver? Can you throw the receiver open? That is number one. Number two is the kind of connectivity that the leader needs throughout the locker room with the O-line, the defensive backs, the wide receivers, the coaches, the front office. Is he a person that can connect everybody that's in their building? And then the third thing is a ruggedness and a durability in the lower body, because, these quarterbacks get bounced around in the pocket. They're harassed in the pocket, and although sometimes they're not sacked, you've got to have the ruggedness to bounce off that contact, set your feet, and throw the football.
You like tree trunk legs, right? Like literally, right? That's what you would say about that, right?
Yeah, you want some sturdiness in the lower body with quick feet. Now, when you look at Lamar Jackson, accuracy, I think there are a lot of people out there that think he's a line drive thrower in terms of, the short and intermediate stuff. He didn't show a lot of touch on his passes. So that's a little bit of a question mark for some people. Connectivity, at Louisville, maybe, but listen, they did all their stuff from the sidelines, not a lot of huddling. Most of the communication was done from the coaching staff with signals and, all that kind of stuff that happens in college football. And that's not uncommon for any of these quarterbacks, but I think that was a thing that people pointed to. And then the third part, and you mentioned all the rushing yardage, his lower half, he is a thin leg prospect. He's plenty tall enough, and obviously he's got plenty of mobility, but there's no way he's going to be able to go rush for 1,000 yards in the NFL against those kind of defenders. So when you look at it from that perspective, there are probably more questions than answers. However, this has been a really good player in high school. He was outstanding at Louisville. And we're going to find out if Lamar Jackson can sort of change the narrative on the dual threat quarterback in the National Football League. Maybe the whole league will go through a transition, but very few of these guys have truly been able to make that quantum leap from college to the NFL and transition into becoming a legitimate pocket passer, first and foremost. And that's going to be the number one challenge for the Ravens.
Are you shocked, by all of this and by the Ravens draft? And I'm shocked they got 12 players. I'm not shocked that Ozzie traded back and picked up a whole bunch more picks. And I wouldn't be shocked if 5 of these players turn out to be pretty good players, including Orlando Brown and or Andrews. They've clearly gone to the offense here and tried to make things a little better for Joe. I like the offseason signings and the wide receiver, but I am perplexed by it a little bit, and I am a little shocked by it. I'm interested. It's great to talk about. I think the competition for Flacco and the excitement for the fans, and how empty the stadium's been here. From the ownership perspective, from where Steve sits, to inject a conversation around this when the Orioles are legendarily bad for all of this summer. It's all good. I just wonder whether the kid can play, because 31 teams passed on him, Phil. Right, and when that happens, I'm always a little skeptical. To me, he's not a real franchise quarterback. He's a guy they dealt into the first round to get an extra year of, quite frankly, pretty deftly, by the way, as well. And I don't feel like they gave up a whole lot to get him. I think I can almost hear Steve in with those guys saying, we don't want to have to go 3-13 so that we have the ability to draft Darnold or Rosen in the future. Let's give away a 2 and a 2. Take this kid now. We get an extra year of him, and maybe this time next year we got a kid that would have been a number 8, and maybe we can go 11-5 this year, and we don't have to be bad like all of these teams have been bad to go take a quarterback. And I know that that's what Steve's trying to avoid, right?
Yeah, I think it was definitely, a plan for the future. I think that, would they have jumped back into the first round for any of these other quarterbacks, a Mason Rudolph or, Kyle Lauletta or Mike White? I don't think so. I think he was an intriguing talent for them. And as I mentioned to Ozzie after the draft, I'm like, Wiz, you took a legacy pick there with Hayden Hurst, and then you left the door prize on the way out with Lamar Jackson. It is going to be fascinating to see how they utilize him and how that impacts Joe Flacco. as the starter? I mean, can we envision a situation where Flacco splits out as a wide receiver and Lamar is, in some sort of wildcat package where he can throw or run the football? I would venture to say that probably will happen this year.
And Joe has been on the record about hating that, and Lamar Jackson had been on the record, about being the slash guy, that he didn't want to be that guy. Do you see 5 years from now Lamar Jackson leading this franchise, Phil? Would you check off on that and say he will be the quarterback in 2020 and 21 and be a really good winning quarterback?
Well, I think it's too early to know that. Again, when you look at the three traits that I think are most important, at least I think there's a question mark on all three of them in some regards. And I think that's one reason why, he was available still at 32. But he is a spectacular talent now. I mean, with the ball in his hands, he might be the fastest player on the field. And it's going to be interesting to see if the Ravens can transfer that ability from the college game to the pro level, because it's the same sport, two different games. And, I do the Bama stuff on Saturdays and go to NFL games on Sundays, and it's a real contrast when you see it on back-to-back days like that. And it's going to be a fascinating watch. So it is, as you say, it's interesting, and we'll see where it goes. As far as, the depth of their draft class, the other 11 players that were taken, I think that the Ravens are getting ready to go, through a transition. They've had an older team the last couple of years, and, it hasn't necessarily translated to go into the playoffs. So I think they were really trying to re-energize their depth of their roster with younger players. I thought they got some good value, especially with some of the guys they got at certain spots in the draft. And so, they're certainly planning for a rainy day in the future.
He is Phil Savage. He is Senior Bowl Phil. The Reese's Senior Bowl out on Twitter. He's also at philsavagefootball.com, where, you did a lot of blogging during the draft about Ozzie Newsome and your relationship and, the outbound Ozzie Newsome and taking in the body of his work. And I found it fascinating that when that trade happened with Lamar Jackson, boy, the late night Thursday night, that last trade made an hours of Ravens conversation on the backside of the draft, that Ozzie certainly made his mark in the draft that weekend. But for the team and trying to sew this together with Flacco, and you've seen disgruntled quarterbacks and all of that stuff, where do you put the Ravens offseason in totality? I think they're a better football team than they were January 1st, Phil.
Yeah, I think, first of all, they're a younger team. I think that they're probably a more reliable team, especially at the wide receiver position with the addition of Willie Snead, and then obviously Michael Crabtree falling in their laps in free agency. So I think that helps. I think the big question on the Ravens will continue to be the offensive line. If they can get a healthy Marshall Yanda back, that obviously would really help. Alex Collins was sort of a discovery last year. Can he continue to play at a higher level? But to me, the key for the Ravens, as long as Joe Flacco is the quarterback, is going to be their run game. And last year they found a bit of a run game with Collins, but I think they've got to be able to marry those things up in terms of the run game with the pass pro, the play action passes, and then the ability to merge those two things and play from ahead, so to speak, so that Terrell Suggs and these other guys can get after the quarterback. The Ravens, to me, are a team that needs to control the pacing of their games, in terms of them finding their most success.
Well, we're going to talk about Hayden Hurst. We're going to talk about Lamar Jackson, although we haven't talked about Hayden Hurst much. But the rest of this draft and taking the tight end out of Oklahoma and more or Alabama, but more than that, the Zeus thing, right? Like, Zeus was one of your favorite guys, and you came from Cleveland. He was one of the scouting guys playing small school and all that. For the legacy pick there and for what Ozzie did there, that was a kid that I went to Indianapolis and thought he might have been the 16th pick in the draft, Phil. And obviously, that was not a good week for him in Indianapolis.
Yeah, of course, Zeus was really a discovery by Pat Hill, the former Fresno State coach that was on our staff in Cleveland, and he was Orlando's biggest champion back in those days, and again a bit of a connection there with Ozzie, and using the phrase a legacy pick again. With Orlando, he's just so massive. I'm talking about Junior. He's so massive. He's got fairly athletic feet. Obviously, the testing numbers at the combine did not match up with some of the stuff that you saw on tape. I mean, he is a get-in-the-way style blocker. I mean, he wasn't a guy that was particularly explosive or, nearly as much of the sledgehammer that his dad was. His dad was a right tackle all the way. I think the Ravens probably feel like Orlando Jr. can be a swing tackle, at least early on. But he is a wide guy to try to get around. And in that system at Oklahoma, he could backpedal, and then a guy would have to go way out around him. And by that time, Baker Mayfield had the ball thrown or, was on the move. So he was effective for Oklahoma. And while we always talk about quarterbacks having to make that transition from college to the NFL, this is a player that was in a system that doesn't necessarily translate to the NFL. So he has a lot to learn. And I think, obviously they're not counting on him playing this year. I think this is another pick for 2019.
Phil Savage is Senior Bowl. Phil out on Twitter and, of course, writing all things about Alabama and 4th and goal every day. Boy, you're doing book signings all the time on your book, and I know it's been successful for you. And being back in that Alabama thing for you down there, that never stops, right? Like, they're going to win another national championship next year, right, in the eyes of everyone.
Well, that's the expectation down here, Nestor. It's crazy. But we had the A-Day game, several weeks ago. As a matter of fact, it was the Saturday before the draft. And Bama ultimately ended up with 12 total draft picks plus 5 more prospects that signed as undrafted. So 17 players were not part of that roster for the A-Day game, of course. And honestly, to the naked eye, all the fans and the media saw were crimson helmets and white jerseys and numbers that they weren't necessarily familiar with, but it looked like the same team. Now, Nick Saban wouldn't tell you that because they have to replace their top 6 defensive backs. They've got 6 or 7 new coaches out of 10. So there's definitely going to be some growing pains here over the summer and training camp. But by the time they get to, the middle of October, late November, I would definitely expect them to be certainly in the mix for the college football playoff again. And I mean, that's amazing. You take 17 players off any football team in America, and that's going to be felt. And yet, with the recruiting and the development that Nick Saban and his staff have done over the years, they don't seem to miss a beat. And that's really was part of the motivation for writing the book, is that I just thought there was a backstory to tell in terms of, the approach and how they've been able to achieve this. And a lot of it dates back to Berea, Ohio, when Nick was with Bill Belichick, and there were, a number of us that were on that staff that were really trying to establish what we were looking for in players and, how to scout and how to evaluate and how to develop. And Nick Saban has certainly mastered that at the college level.
Well, you mentioned all those DBs going in the draft. It took Ozzie a day and a half, but he got one of them, right? Some thoughts about Everett?
Yeah, Anthony, of course, the 2-year starter. Nestor, now, in the 16 season, he was the first-year starter opposite of Marlon Humphrey. And early in the season, the opponents really went after him because, he didn't have the reputation that Marlon did. I would tell you that by the end of the year, they were avoiding Everett and, sending more passes towards Marlon Humphrey's side of the field. Remember, Marlon had the strained hamstring down the stretch, and he gave up some plays his final year at Alabama. So Anthony came back again this past year as a senior. I thought he had a solid year. He is an outside corner. He can run sub 4.4 all day long. That's what his game is built on, is just outright straight line speed down the field. And, he's a nice value pick there in the 4th round for Baltimore because ultimately he could be an outside starting corner, and if there's a corner there that can kick inside in the sub packages, then he certainly could maybe even get on the field this year on the perimeter. But he didn't get a lot of experience in the slot as a nickel. That was Minka Fitzpatrick's job over the years, and then Tony Brown at different times. So Anthony's main experience has been outside, and so he'll help out there at some point in time, and then also on special teams.
Bradley Bozeman, I know late pick there. Any chance? The Ravens have had good luck with late. Ryan Jensen being an example. That took a couple of years, but are we going to be hearing about him playing on this team 2 years from now?
I'll say this about Bradley. He started for 2 years. He had huge shoes to fill because Ryan Kelly, the previous center, went first round to the Indianapolis Colts, and the big concern going into the 16 season was Bama had no experience at quarterback, running back, or offensive center. And I can remember saying a number of times that, look, everybody's focused on the quarterbacks, the running backs. The biggest problem Bama's got to solve this year is finding a replacement for Ryan Kelly. And Bradley stepped in there and did a very functional job for Alabama. He's big for a center. He's 6'5", 310 pounds or so.
Wow.
So he's bigger than your typical center in terms of the height. He takes up a lot of space. He'll work very hard. He's not particularly a great athlete. He's not particularly mobile, but he is the proverbial cork in a bottle. He was a tremendous leader for Alabama. I tell you, he hit the trifecta, Nestor, that first week of January. Bama wins the national championship. He drops to a knee and asks his girlfriend to marry him right after the game, so he gets engaged. And then the very next day, I called him with that Reese's Senior Bowl invite. So he had a heck of a run there in early January, and he's a great guy, so he'll fit in well.
I'm sure you fed him well down in Mobile, Phil. So, hey, always a pleasure. I know your time's valuable. I love having you on. Love our friendship all these years. I'll send everybody out to follow you out on Twitter, as well as at PhilSavageFootball.com, and, of course, Senior Bowl Phil out on Twitter. There's a rumor I'm going to try to get to Mobile next year because it's close to Atlanta. I'm just saying, okay?
All right, Nestor, always enjoy the time. Be well, and we'll catch up soon.
Save me some oysters and some shrimp down there. He is Phil Savage, longtime Ravens college football director of scouting and Super Bowl 35 champion, now down at Alabama doing radio, doing Senior Bowl, down in Mobile, and doing ESPN, and doing Sirius XM, and he's Phil Savage, the man, the myth, the legend. Always great to visit with Phil. The book is Fourth and Goal, by the way, if you want to check that out as well. Nasty at WNST.net finds me. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, streaming live on our Facebook, as well as our YouTube WNSTV channel. We are WNST.net, AM 1570 and WNST Towson, Baltimore, and we never stop talking Baltimore sports.